She woke up in a bed that wasn't hers. The room smelled of lavender and leather, soft sheets tangled around her limbs. Her mouth was dry, her body strangely warm, pulsing with a heat that didn't feel natural. Her heart pounded. Her breath came short and shallow, and the air felt thick, almost unreal. Emily blinked at the ceiling, the golden chandelier above her swaying slightly, or maybe it was just her vision. She tried to sit up, but her body felt heavy, every movement slow, disconnected, like her mind had not yet caught up to her limbs. Her skin tingled with every brush of fabric, unfamiliar, sensitive. Her thoughts blurred as if the world had melted into a strange dream she couldn't wake up from. Then the door opened, and a man rolled into the room in a sleek, silent wheelchair, dressed in a crisp black shirt, his presence calm and composed. Older than her by maybe 10 years, with a strong jaw, piercing blue eyes, and hair too perfectly neat to belong to someone ordinary. But his eyes didn't look at her with concern or pity. They were cold, guarded, like someone who had seen too much and believed too little. "You're awake," he said, his voice deep and even, not surprised, not soft, just a statement, firm and unbothered. And Emily tried to focus on him, her lips trembling, unsure if this was help or danger. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse, her throat burning. But the man didn't answer right away. He wheeled forward, stopping near the bed, just far enough to give her space but close enough to control the moment. "You were at the Calloway Foundation Gala last night. Someone drugged your drink. I stopped it before anything worse happened," he said, and her breath hitched, her chest tightened. Her mind flashed back to last night, her friend's insistence that she come to the party, that it was a good place to meet important people, just one drink. She remembered the music, the laughter, the dizziness, then the floor moving under her feet, then black. "You brought me here," she said, unsure whether to be grateful or afraid. "I had to," he replied. "The others wanted to call an ambulance, but you were whispering my name. Apparently you read about me somewhere." Emily's cheeks flushed, her mind racing. She didn't remember saying anything. She didn't remember knowing who he was, but something about his name sounded familiar. "What's your name?" she asked, still dazed. "Aidan Cole," he said simply, and it clicked, like a puzzle snapping into place. The billionaire, the tech mogul, the man who lost the use of his legs in a mysterious accident 3 years ago, the man whose face had been on the cover of Forbes and Time, known for cold business deals and quiet charity work, admired and feared in equal measure. He looked at her closely now, his voice low, steady. "What did they give you?" "I don't know," she whispered. Her fingers clutched the edge of the silk sheet, still trying to understand how she had gone from a college gala to the penthouse of a billionaire in less than a night. Aidan turned toward the window, the light from outside streaking across the marble floor, illuminating the tension in his shoulders. He spoke without looking back. "It was something strong, not lethal, but made to remove resistance." Emily's stomach dropped, her eyes wide. "Did someone try to—" she began. "No," he said quickly, sharply. "They didn't get the chance." She looked at him again, his expensive chair, his distance, his control. "Thank you," she said, but he didn't respond. "I'll get you something to wear and arrange a ride," he said after a moment. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Not out of suspicion, but something else, something deeper. "Because when I found you, you were crying, you said you were scared, and you asked me not to leave." He turned to her. "And I didn't." Emily swallowed hard. Something tightened in her chest, a feeling she didn't have words for. She remembered the doctor he had quietly brought in earlier that morning, the one who had checked her, quietly, respectfully, the one who had given Aidan a look when it was over and said softly, "She's a virgin." Aidan hadn't flinched, but something in him shifted, and it hadn't gone away since. Aidan Cole had not always lived in silence and steel. Once he had been a name that inspired admiration, envy, sometimes fear, but never pity. Born in Palo Alto, raised in Boston, son of a surgeon and a venture capitalist, He had grown up surrounded by ambition, learning early that power was not something given, it was built, brick by brick, deal by deal, and by the time he was 26, he had founded Cole Biomedical, a company that would revolutionize spinal therapy, wearable tech, and neural mapping, turning him into the youngest billionaire in the country, not because he inherited money, but because he saw what others didn't, because he never stopped moving, until the day everything did. The accident happened on a Tuesday, a black SUV that came out of nowhere on a quiet street in Manhattan. The brakes failed, or at least that's what the report said. The impact crushed the lower half of the car, and with it, Aiden's ability to walk. His spinal cord wasn't severed completely, but the damage was enough. Enough to make doctors say unlikely, enough to make headlines scream tragic, enough to make people lower their voices when he entered a room as if pity were a courtesy. But Aiden never asked for pity. He rebuilt, quietly, efficiently. And he kept control of everything. His company, his image, his circle, all tightly managed, except the part of him he locked away, the part that knew how it felt to run, to lift someone without metal under him, the part that once believed in falling in love. The penthouse where Emily woke up wasn't just a home, it was a fortress, a glass and marble monument to distance, perched above the city like a throne. Everything inside was deliberate, sleek furniture, art with no faces, steel frames, muted colors, cold beauty. And yet the air held something softer now. Maybe it was her. Emily Walker had grown up far from the world of billion-dollar mergers and titanium wheelchairs. Raised in a modest neighborhood outside Chicago by her adoptive father, a retired firefighter, she was the kind of girl who worked 2 jobs without complaining, who studied at night and volunteered on weekends. Majoring in psychology with the dream of opening a youth center one day, she had never been to a party like the Callaway Gala before. Her friend Jasmine had talked her into it, said it was just drinks and networking, a way to maybe meet someone who could offer an internship. Emily had gone with hesitation, borrowed a dress, worn secondhand heels, but she hadn't expected the way people looked at her, as if kindness was weakness, as if purity was prey. She didn't remember much from the party, just fragments, the swirl of champagne, the glint of cufflinks, a man's laugh too close to her ear, the sudden weight in her limbs, the loss of control, then darkness, and now this. A stranger who had saved her but looked at her like she was a puzzle he didn't want to solve. Aiden didn't usually intervene, not in people's lives, not in situations that weren't his to control. But something about that night had pulled at him, the way she had slumped near the hallway, barely conscious, mumbling words no one else paid attention to. The way her hands trembled when he carried her, the fact that she had said his name before ever meeting him. It wasn't fate. He didn't believe in that, but it was something. And it made him angry. Not at her, but at the world, at how vulnerable goodness still was, even in the middle of chandeliers and string quartets. He hadn't planned on keeping her there for the night, but when the private doctor arrived and did the blood work, when the results confirmed what he already suspected, when the doctor looked at him with that quiet understanding, he knew this wasn't just another careless victim of a society that played too hard. This girl was untouched, unbroken, and someone had tried to change that. Aiden didn't know why it mattered so much, but it did. He checked the footage, reviewed the guest list, called his head of security, found out who poured her drink, who invited her, and why. Every name was now on a list, and every person would answer for what almost happened. He told no one what the doctor had said, not even her. He kept it in the silence between them, in the way he handed her the folded clothes the next morning, in the way he didn't ask questions he already knew answers to. Emily noticed the way his hands never shook, the way he moved through his space like it bent around him, the way he never let anyone too close, not even the staff. She wondered how someone could have so much and still look like they carried a weight no one else could see. She didn't know why he chose to help her, and when she asked again, his answer was simple. Too simple. Because you asked me not to leave. The following days unfolded like something neither of them could name. Not quite comfort and not yet connection. Aiden kept his distance, or at least he told himself he did, but he still found himself asking his assistant to reschedule meetings so he could remain at home. He told himself it was for security, that the girl was still in danger, that there were names on his list he hadn't confronted yet, but the truth was simpler and harder. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Emily spent most of her time in the guest room, a space too perfect to feel real, with pale blue walls and furniture that looked untouched. But she didn't feel like a guest, not really. She helped the housekeeper without being asked, folded sheets that weren't hers, watered flowers that weren't wilting. And when Aiden wheeled into the room during one of those quiet afternoons, she smiled at him, not because she had to, but because she meant it, and that was something he hadn't seen in years. It started with small things, conversations at breakfast, long silences broken by questions neither of them expected, like where did you grow up, or what made you start your company, or why psychology? And with each answer came something deeper, a piece of self, offered and accepted, unwrapped slowly like a fragile memory. Aiden told her about his first invention, a prototype he had built from broken toys at 12, a neural stimulator that earned him a local science award, and she told him about reading psychology books in the library alone after school because talking to people scared her, but understanding them gave her courage. Their rhythms didn't match, but somehow they danced. Emily moved through the world with warmth and soft energy, while Aiden watched everything with calculating precision. Yet when she laughed, he listened, and when he frowned, she noticed, and that was how it began. Not with grand gestures, but with glances held too long, with hands brushing in passing, with her forgetting for a moment that he was in a wheelchair, and him forgetting for a moment that he was supposed to be untouchable. One evening, after a quiet dinner where the city lights flickered behind the glass like stars trying to reach them, Aiden offered her something unexpected. A job. Not a formal role with a title and contract, but a position he created just for her. Personal project coordinator, assisting him with the new community program he was building, aimed at supporting mental health for youth, a role that didn't exist until he imagined her in it, and when she accepted, she didn't realize he had just made space for her in his life, not just his business. Working together changed everything. Proximity bred familiarity, and familiarity exposed tension. There were days she challenged him, questioned decisions, pushed back with compassion and conviction, and those days he respected her more than anyone in the boardroom. But there were also moments that were harder to name. Like when she adjusted the collar of his shirt before a video call, her fingers warm against his skin, or when he reached for her wrist to stop her from leaving a room and forgot to let go right away. One night it rained, thick, heavy drops against the tall windows, the sound filling the space between them as they sat in the study reviewing documents. The power flickered and went out, and in the dim emergency light, Aiden saw her differently, not just as a girl he saved, not even as a woman he admired, but as someone who had become part of him without asking. She was soaked from earlier, her shirt clinging to her frame, her cheeks flushed from the cold, and he reached out to give her his jacket, but their hands met midair and neither of them moved. The silence stretched until it broke under its own weight. "I can't," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I can't want this. Not with you. Not like this." "Why not?" she asked, and her voice trembled only slightly. "Because I know what it's like to have something beautiful and watch the world take it away," he said, "and I'm tired of losing." She didn't respond with words. Instead, she leaned forward, slowly, as if giving him time to pull back, but he didn't. Their foreheads touched, breath mingled, and for a moment the rest of the world dissolved. But the kiss didn't come. Not then, not yet, because something sharp rang through the air, a phone vibrating violently on the table, a message blinking red. Aiden reached for it, his eyes scanning fast, his jaw clenched. "They found out who did it," he said quietly. "The man who spiked your drink, it was someone on the planning committee, paid off by a competing firm. They wanted leverage against me. You were never supposed to be there." Emily's hands trembled, not from fear but fury. So I was just in the way. You were never just anything, Aiden said, his tone low, almost fierce. They used you to get to me, and I let it happen. But it wasn't your fault, she said, her voice firm. You saved me. I should have seen it coming, he replied. I used to be able to read people. Now I only read numbers. Their closeness shifted after that night. Something had been admitted between them, not declared but undeniable, and it changed the air. He looked at her longer, softer, and she smiled less, like a guest, and more like someone who belonged. But not everyone approved. When the press found out about Emily, headlines bloomed like wildfire: the billionaire and the nobody, scandal or sympathy. Opinion pieces speculated everything. Was she a nurse, a mistress, a social climber? And though Aiden didn't speak to the media, didn't feed the fire, he made one thing clear to his board: if anyone touched her, they would be done. But protection wasn't love, and safety wasn't peace. The pressure mounted as they tried to keep their growing bond professional, and every day it felt more impossible. The board began to ask questions. Rumors began to circulate about favoritism, conflict of interest, and Emily began to doubt her place, not in the apartment, but in his world. One afternoon, she packed a small bag, planning to leave quietly, to give him back the quiet he once valued. But Aiden found her at the elevator, his eyes dark with a storm she had never seen before. You're not leaving, he said. Not like this. I don't belong here, she said. People are talking, your work is suffering. I can't be another weakness in your armor. You're not my weakness, he said, his voice almost a whisper. You're the only reason I still believe there's something good left in me. Her breath caught, and he moved closer, his chair inches from her knees, his hand reaching for hers. You don't have to love me, he said, but please don't leave before I show you why I never stopped hoping you would. And just like that, she stayed, not because it was easy, but because it was true, and from that moment on, neither of them pretended anymore. The days that followed were quieter but heavy, not with silence, but with the weight of things left unsaid. Aiden and Emily worked side by side, but the line between professional and personal had dissolved, not in dramatic gestures, but in subtle shifts. The way he waited for her to enter a room before starting a meeting, the way she noticed when his hands clenched a little tighter during difficult calls, the way they learned each other's rhythms without needing to speak them out loud. Still, something restless stirred beneath the surface, something unsolved, like a door slightly ajar in a dark hallway. Emily had always known her past was fragmented. Her birth parents were a mystery. Her adoptive father had told her what little he knew, that she had been found abandoned outside a clinic as a baby, with no note and no explanation, taken in through the system and eventually adopted by a man who never made her feel like she was anything less than his. But still the empty space had always been there, a part of her she had learned to live with, until now. It started with a conversation, one she wasn't meant to hear, a phone call between Aiden and his lawyer, quiet voices behind a half-closed door, a name she had never heard but somehow recognized, Robert Langston. And a file, an old file, sealed and hidden for decades. It mentioned her, her birthday, her real name before adoption, and a scandal that had rocked one of the city's most powerful families, a baby taken to protect her from a blood feud over inheritance. Emily's name wasn't on the front page, but it was buried inside, connected to a story no one had ever told her. She confronted Aiden that night, not with anger but with confusion. Why do you have files about me? Who is Robert Langston, and why was I found near a hospital funded by your family's foundation? He didn't answer immediately, his eyes searching hers, like he was trying to measure how much truth she could handle. And then he spoke, carefully, slowly, as if afraid the words themselves might break her. Robert Langston was my godfather, he said. He ran the Langston Trust, one of the founding partners in Cole Biomedical. 22 years ago, his daughter vanished. During a custody battle, she was pregnant. No one ever found her or the baby. I didn't know the full story until recently, when your name started showing up in old records connected to the Foundation's outreach database. Your DNA matched someone on file. That someone was her. Emily's breath caught. So, you think I'm the baby? I don't think I know, he said, and handed her a document, a printed result from a private lab, her DNA compared to the missing woman's parents, a 99.9% match. Emily Walker wasn't just a girl who survived a drug cocktail at a gala. She was the missing heiress of one of the city's oldest fortunes, a truth buried to protect her from a war she never asked to be part of. She didn't cry, not at first, just stared at the paper like it might turn into something else if she looked hard enough. Then slowly the questions came, not about money or power, but about identity. Who was her mother? Why was she abandoned? And who knew the truth all these years? Aiden answered what he could, but most of it was still a puzzle. Pieces that had been kept apart for 2 decades. And now she was at the center. Her presence in Aiden's life had never been a coincidence. Not entirely. It was fate threaded through chaos. But it also meant something darker. Someone had known who she was. Someone had lured her to that gala for a reason. It wasn't just about revenge on Aiden. It was about drawing her out, revealing her connection to the Langston legacy, and claiming what they believed was theirs. The security breach at Cole Biomedical suddenly made more sense. Files had been copied, internal messages leaked. Someone had been trying to destabilize the company and Aiden's public image, all while pushing Emily into the spotlight. They didn't just want to hurt Aiden, they wanted to destroy him, using the one thing he wouldn't let go of. Emily blamed herself at first, not for being born, but for being found. For not knowing sooner, for bringing trouble into a world already full of battles. But Aiden stopped her with just one look. One sentence that didn't need explanation. You are never the problem. You're the reason I still have something to fight for. The investigation led them to Jasmine, Emily's former friend, the one who had invited her to the gala. She had been paid, not once but many times, by an anonymous account linked to an offshore shell company. Jasmine confessed under pressure, told them she didn't know who Emily really was, just that she had been instructed to make sure Emily attended and stayed close to Aiden. The rest would be handled by others. Others turned out to be people Aiden once trusted. A former board member who had been ousted after an ethics scandal, a rival who had always believed Cole Biomedical should have belonged to someone else, and a quiet man named Samuel Crane, a private consultant with ties to the Langston Trust. The same trust that once protected Emily, now being used to expose her. Aiden confronted Crane in a cold boardroom at dawn. No lawyers, no assistants, just 2 men and a truth too heavy to hide. Crane admitted the plan had been in motion for over a year. Once they suspected Emily's identity, they set the trap. The gala was just the beginning. The media storm and public attention were meant to push her into reclaiming her inheritance and distancing herself from Aiden. Then they could come in as legal counsel and control her assets. But Emily didn't run, and Aiden didn't fall. Together they pushed back, filed countersuits, exposed the scandal in carefully timed releases, and protected the company while preserving Emily's right to choose. She was offered her place in the Langston Family Trust, a seat at the board of one of the most powerful philanthropic organizations in the country. But she hesitated, not because she feared the responsibility, but because she wasn't sure who she was anymore. She stood on the balcony of the penthouse one night, looking over the city as the wind played with her hair, and when Aiden joined her, she asked a question that had been sitting in her chest for days. "Do you think they'll ever see me as more than a symbol?" He answered without pause, "I don't care what they see. I know who you are, and that's enough for me." It wasn't about blood or fortune anymore, not about legacy or betrayal. It was about choice, and Emily made hers. She accepted the Langston name only to redirect its power, channeling the Trust's vast resources into rebuilding youth programs, shelters, education funds. turning what once nearly destroyed her into something that could protect others. She didn't take the spotlight, she rewired it. And Aiden, through it all, never asked her to stay, never demanded love or loyalty, but she stayed anyway, not because he saved her, but because he saw her, even before she saw herself. And in a world full of lies, that was the rarest truth of all. The peace they built was fragile, not because it was false, but because it was rare. Too rare in a world that never stopped watching, questioning, dissecting every move they made. For a while, it felt like things had settled. Emily's connection to the Langston name had been acknowledged, the scandal around the gala had quieted, and Aiden's company had recovered from the storm with stronger footing. Yet beneath the polished surface, something darker brewed. Pieces of the past not yet buried, shadows that hadn't forgotten how to reach forward. It started with a threat, subtle at first. A message left on Aiden's encrypted server, lines of code that didn't belong, a string of characters referencing Emily's full birth name and a date, not one either of them recognized. But it didn't take long to trace it back. The same digital signature had appeared once before, 3 years earlier, 2 weeks before Aiden's accident. A coincidence too precise to be ignored. They hadn't connected it then, no one had. But now the link was clear. The man who orchestrated the crash that left Aiden in a wheelchair hadn't disappeared. He had only gone deeper underground, waiting. His name was Mason Varick, a former shareholder in Cole Biomedical, once praised for his brilliance in biotech engineering, later exposed for experimenting on human subjects without consent. Aiden had led the charge to remove him from the company, had testified against him in closed court. The outcome was career ruin, but no jail time, too little evidence, too many favors. Mason vanished after that. Some said he fled the country, others believed he died. But neither was true. He had simply hidden long enough to return with more to lose. Now he wanted control again, not of the company, but of the narrative. He had been the one to orchestrate the gala incident, not to hurt Emily directly, but to lure her into the open, to use her name and her image to discredit the Langston Trust, to expose its secrets and dismantle its influence, and most of all, to hurt Aiden where it would scar deepest, not his company, but his heart. Aiden didn't tell Emily immediately. He wanted to protect her from the truth for a little longer. Not because he thought she couldn't handle it, but because he didn't want to see that light in her dim again. Yet secrets in love are time bombs, and this one was ticking fast. She found out not through him, but through a news leak. A story carefully planted in an independent blog that only insiders read. One detailing the real reason behind Aiden's accident, with implications about betrayal, and a woman at the center of it all, unnamed but unmistakable. She confronted him that night, not with rage but with sorrow. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you try to carry it alone?" And he looked at her with eyes full of pain. "Because I knew what it did to me, I didn't want it to do the same to you." But it already had. The truth had found her anyway, and now she was part of it, whether she wanted to be or not. They decided to fight together, not with lawyers or press statements, but with action. They tracked Varick's movements through shell companies and fake research grants. They discovered he was developing an unlicensed biotech operation overseas, experimenting again, this time with neurostimulation for military use, testing on people without their knowledge, using stolen tech from Cole Biomedical, tech Aiden had pioneered before the accident. The files confirmed it. The fingerprints were his, but the applications were twisted, turned into weapons. The only way to stop it was to expose it, to go public, to put everything at risk, including their reputations, their safety, and the fragile life they had just started to build. Emily hesitated, not because she was afraid for herself, but because she was afraid of losing him again if they went to war with this man. He wouldn't just come for them in the media, he would come for them in the dark, and this time he knew too much. Still, they made the decision. Together, Aiden organized a press conference, not through corporate channels, but through independent media. Live-streamed, unfiltered, raw, He revealed the truth about the stolen research, the black market experiments, and the man behind it all. He didn't mention Emily by name, but everyone knew who he was protecting. And for the first time in years, he looked not like a victim, but like a survivor reclaiming his place. But Mason Varick didn't back down. Hours after the broadcast, a fire broke out at one of the Langston Trust's community centers. A message left in ash and glass. "Stay out of what isn't yours." The authorities treated it as arson, but Aidan and Emily knew better. It was a warning. And it wasn't the last one. Soon after, their systems were hacked, private messages leaked, photos taken without consent appeared online. Speculations about Emily's parentage resurfaced, twisted into rumors of manipulation, suggesting she had seduced Aidan for power. The pressure became unbearable. Aidan's board began questioning his decisions again. Investors grew restless, and Emily received threats in her inbox every morning. Still, she didn't leave. Not even when Aidan begged her to disappear for her own safety. She refused, not because she was reckless, but because she had made her choice long ago. "I'd rather face danger with you than live safe without you." Then came the breaking point. A board meeting scheduled without Aidan's consent, a vote to remove him as CEO for mental instability and compromised judgment. They used his accident, his relationship, and the recent scandals as ammunition. The vote was stacked before it even began, and when Aidan walked into that boardroom flanked by his lawyers and Emily at his side, he knew this was not a fight for position. It was a fight for his name. He didn't argue, didn't plead. Instead, he presented the final piece of evidence. Documents leaked to him by a whistleblower inside Mason's operation. Proof of corporate sabotage, attempted murder, and illegal experimentation, linked directly to Varick and to one of the board members in the room. The silence that followed was thick. And when the truth landed, the vote flipped. Not only was Aidan reinstated with full authority, the implicated members were removed pending investigation, and for the first time in years, justice tilted in his favor. But even victory didn't erase the fear. Emily knew Varick wouldn't stop, not until he had nothing left to destroy, so she made a choice. Aidan didn't expect. She went to the press herself, told her story from the beginning, not as a victim, but as a voice. She spoke about what happened at the gala, what it meant to be silenced by power, and how love had given her the strength to speak. The video went viral within hours, not because she was famous, but because and in that moment the narrative shifted. She wasn't a scandal anymore, she was a survivor. When she returned to the penthouse that night, Aidan was waiting. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at her like he had never seen her before, like he was seeing something holy. And then he said quietly, "You saved me." And she smiled through the exhaustion. "You saved me first." The city didn't go quiet. The world didn't change overnight. But something had shifted. A line had been drawn, and they had stood on the right side of it, together. Time moved forward, but not all wounds healed with it. Sometimes it only taught people how to carry them better. Emily had become a symbol to many, a voice for those who had never been heard, and though her days were filled with meetings, public appearances, and program planning, the quiet moments with Aidan remained the only place where she still felt entirely herself. They rarely spoke about Varick anymore, at least not in public, but his shadow hadn't faded. And in the silence between headlines and handshakes, something unspoken lingered in Aidan's eyes, something distant, heavy, waiting. It began subtly, a missed call here, a forgotten file there. Aidan's hands sometimes trembled when he tried to hold a pen for too long. His focus drifted in meetings where once he commanded every word. Emily noticed first, of course she did, but when she asked if he was sleeping well or feeling all right, he brushed it off, told her it was stress, exhaustion, the price of being in the spotlight again. But she knew better. She had learned how to read him even when he was trying not to be read. The truth came one afternoon when Aidan collapsed during a presentation, his body slumped in the chair with no warning, his eyes unfocused, his lips moving without sound. Panic spread through the room, but Emily remained calm. her arms around him before anyone else could reach, whispering his name again and again until the paramedics arrived. The hospital stay was short, but the diagnosis was not. A neurodegenerative condition, rare but real, one that had likely begun before the accident, but only now showed symptoms too advanced to ignore. The irony was cruel. The man who had dedicated his life to advancing neurological treatment was now becoming its patient. There was no cure, only management delays and uncertainty, and Aidan took the news the way he took most things, quietly, privately, shutting the world out behind closed doors. But this time, Emily didn't let him do it alone. She sat beside him on the floor of his study one night, while the world outside spun too fast, her hand wrapped around his even as it shook. And when he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "You deserve more than this, more than me, more than what's coming." She looked at him without blinking, her eyes fierce and full of fire. "You don't get to decide what I deserve, not when I already chose you, not when I already knew." "But I didn't want this for you," he whispered. "I wanted to be the man who stood beside you, not the one you have to carry." "Then let me carry you," she said simply, not out of pity but out of promise, out of a love that had already endured storms stronger than any diagnosis. And in that moment, Aidan realized something he had fought for years. That strength wasn't in standing alone, it was in allowing someone to stand with you even when you couldn't. He tried to push her away after that, not cruelly but intentionally, returning to long work hours, closing himself off in labs, declining her invitations to events. But Emily wasn't a girl who left just because the road turned steep. She showed up every time, not with speeches but with presence, bringing dinner to his office, sitting beside him during treatments, making him laugh even when his muscles refused to cooperate. And slowly the walls he tried to rebuild began to crumble again. Then came the offer, an experimental trial overseas, high risk but with the potential to slow the disease dramatically. It was being run by a team Aidan had mentored years before, scientists who still respected him deeply. They invited him not as a patient but as a collaborator, someone who could help redesign the system from within. The catch was that it required relocation for at least a year, and complete confidentiality. Emily encouraged him to go, even offered to come with him, but Aidan hesitated, not because he didn't want her there, but because he was afraid of what a year might take from her. "You have your work, your people, you've built something real here," he told her one night as they sat watching the city lights blink like distant stars, and she looked at him with a calm that didn't shake. "Nothing I built matters if I lose you in the process." Still, he insisted, and in the end they reached a compromise. He would go first, settle in, monitor the treatment, and if things stabilized, she would follow. It wasn't a goodbye, just a pause, a test of space and time and hope. They spent their last week together quietly, away from headlines and cameras, walking through gardens, revisiting the places where their story had begun. No declarations, just presence, just hands held tightly like anchors. When the day came, Emily drove him to the airport herself. They didn't speak much in the car. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of memories, full of the weight of everything they'd shared. And when he looked at her before boarding, he said the words she never forgot. "If anything happens to me, I want you to remember, this isn't where our story ends." She kissed his forehead, then his lips, and smiled through the sting in her eyes. "It's not an ending, it's a plot twist." He left, and the days that followed stretched thin. Emily threw herself into work, doubled her outreach efforts, expanded her programs, but her nights were quiet, too quiet without him. They spoke when they could, but the time zones and confidentiality limits made communication scarce. Still, every time she looked at the stars, she whispered the same thing: "Come back to me." Then the letter came, handwritten, sealed in an envelope she recognized instantly. It arrived with a small package from Switzerland. Inside was a bracelet they had once seen in a street market and laughed about, a silly charm with a tiny engraved heart and a compass. The letter was brief but full of him, full of thoughts he couldn't say aloud, of love too big for the phone. It ended with one line. "No matter which way this goes, my heart will always find its way to you." Emily kept it close. Not just the bracelet, but the truth in that final sentence. And when months passed and the update slowed, she refused to panic, refused to let fear replace faith. And finally, one morning, as spring returned to the city, he did too. He came back thinner but stronger, not cured but stable, not healed but fighting. And when she opened the door and saw him there, his chair by her porch, his smile soft and tired, she didn't cry. She just stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him like the rest of the world didn't exist. "I told you it wasn't the end," she whispered, and he laughed quietly. "You were always the plot twist I never saw coming." The city felt different now, not because its buildings had changed or its streets had grown quieter, but because something inside both of them had. Emily no longer walked like someone searching for answers, and Aidan no longer watched the world from behind his walls. They had weathered too many storms to keep pretending that love was something fragile, or that commitment could only survive in the absence of chaos. Instead, they built something unshakable, not from grand gestures or perfect plans, but from the decision to stay, to choose each other even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Aidan returned to Cole Biomedical not as the man who once ran it alone, but as the leader of a new era, one where innovation was tied to empathy, where progress came with responsibility, and where the voices of those most often overlooked were finally invited to speak. He didn't work the same hours or keep the same pace, but his presence carried more weight than ever, because now it wasn't just about building something that changed the world. It was about leaving behind a legacy that honored the pain it took to get there. Emily continued her work with the Langston Trust, expanding outreach programs into rural communities, launching mental health clinics in underfunded neighborhoods, and creating scholarships for young women from backgrounds like hers. She used her name not as a shield but as a light, guiding others who had once felt lost in the dark the way she had. Her days were full and often exhausting, but they were rich with purpose, and every night she came home to the only place that ever felt like safety, a small apartment they shared just outside the city, quiet, sunlit, and filled with books, laughter, and the kind of peace that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. They didn't rush marriage or headlines or any of the milestones others expected. Instead, they let their story unfold on its own terms. One morning, over coffee with the window open and music playing in the background, Aidan reached into his pocket and handed her a ring. No speech, no spotlight, just a look that said he didn't need to ask, because they both already knew. She didn't cry, she smiled, wide and full, and slipped it onto her finger without a word. It wasn't a beginning or an ending, just a continuation of everything they had already survived. Their wedding was quiet, held in the garden behind the first youth center Emily ever opened, attended by a few close friends, former patients, mentors, and young people whose lives had been changed by their work. There were no media crews or luxury headlines, just vows whispered under soft lights and a promise made with hands that had held each other through fire. When Aidan said, "I do," his voice didn't shake, and when Emily said it back, hers didn't either, because this time neither of them had anything left to fear. Years later, when people asked how they had lasted through so much, how two people from such different worlds had found something that held, Emily would always smile before answering. She never spoke of the gala or the secrets or the pain. She simply said, "Because we didn't fall in love with each other's stories, we fell in love with each other's scars and chose to stay anyway." Love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about choosing someone real, over and over again, even when the world tries to pull you apart. Because sometimes the strongest kind of love is the one that grows, not in peace, but in persistence.